It's been about a year since The Death of Snow White was released. Looking back now, how do you feel about the film and the reaction it received from both critics and audience? Has your perspective on the film changed over time, or do you still feel much the same way about it as you did when it was first released?
My perspective has not changed too much on it. It's definitely a project that I love with all my heart. It was a lot of fun to make. It's a lot of fun for me to watch. And um, I think with the reaction I've gotten, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I
Yeah,
think that people enjoyed it a lot. It does have its limitations based on finances. You know, it was made for $750,000, which is very small. When you
yeah,
have a cast that large and you have to create a world that has castles and, you know, knights and armor and horses, and every costume has to be made or sourced. It's a lot of money that goes into that. And we don't have the big budget to make this world look super fancy. So if I was to go back and do anything differently, I would love to have more money to really put the time and details into some of the visuals. But in my mind, the story and the heart that's in the movie kind of overshadow that. And I think you can forgive some of the financial limitations um, by the story, you know, and having it be entertaining and heartfelt.
yeah. It's great. Thank you so much. You could have worked in many different genres throughout your career. What ultimately drew you to horror? What does horror offer you as a filmmaker that other genres simply can't?
What drew me to horror was just my own personal fascination. Growing up, horror movies scared me as a kid, and it made me feel something that I didn't feel in my everyday life. It also brought on more creativity. It's something that a drama or a comedy itself, which I love comedies, is just, I feel like you can have more creative space, do more things. You can have drama, you can have comedy, you can have um, silliness. Just the kills can be creative, this tension can be creative. There's a big playground to do a lot of things with that. And only a couple of genres like fantasy, sci-fi, and horror for me, give you that kind of playground to explore more. So I think just that in general. And I'm a very visual person, so the visuals in these are often greater as well.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you so much. You've spoken before about your love for films like Halloween, Willow, and The Never-Ending Story. Looking back on your career, which filmmakers or films have had the biggest influence on your work, and in what ways do you think those influences still show up in your films today?
I would say the biggest filmmakers that have had an influence on me would be George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, because Star Wars was my first movie I'd seen. We grew up very poor with no money. We were at a friend of my family's house, and we went in. All the kids were downstairs in the basement, and they were watching Star Wars on, I believe it was HBO at the time. It was a very long time ago. And being about 6 years old, I believe at the time, 6 or 7, walking in and seeing the Millennium Falcon go into hyperspace was the first scene I saw coming back into the cockpit with Chewbacca and Han Solo. Luke, it was like, what is this? I've never seen anything like it. And then the stormtroopers and Darth Vader, I was now hooked on film and what this meant in costumes and special effects because it just blew my mind. And then watching Indiana Jones and like Neverending Story, that the things about these movies is while they have a pretty serious plot
Yeah,
and goal, they're able to add heart. They're able to add comedy as well. There's a lot of funny moments.
yeah,
And so I find when I'm making my movies that that's just something I'm gravitating towards as well, is trying to put a little bit of humor and a little bit of sadness and I like the roller coaster going with your emotions up and down in that and not just being in one monotone uh place. So
that's a great answer. Thank you so much. When you begin developing a story, what usually comes first? The characters, the world, or the imagery? What does your writing process typically look like?
I think it changes depending on the story. It sometimes, if I'm presented with an idea, like when I was presented Snow White, it started with the characters, and I started wondering, like, what would our characters be like? What does this world look like? And we already know the basic story, which is a short story. How do we make that full? And so I thought, well, what do I want to know about that world that hasn't been told many times with many other movies? And so I thought, well, let's focus on the queen. Why is she like that? Let's focus on the kiss and the prince and why he would come, why that matters. Let's focus on these things and kind of explore those. And so that's where that came from. Otherwise, if there's like Friday the 13th, it's Jason. What is him? So I start with the characters or my own personal stories I write. Sometimes I'll be inspired by a thought, and it might be an environment. And so I think of the location or place, and it's like, oh, what would this abandoned place, what stories could be told here? And then you start creating ideas and characters around that. Um, so and just anything that inspires me will spark that, and the characters might come right away, or they may come later down the road, and vice versa. You know, I have a character I love that I want to write for.
Mhm.
What's their world look like? And what makes sense for that? So I think it changes on each project, and it really depends on what my spark of creativity is in the beginning.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. Uh, what makes a film feel like a Jason Brooks film? Are there recurring themes, ideas, or obsession that you find yourself returning to throughout your work?
Yeah, I think what makes a Jason Brooks film is maybe going back a little bit to that influence from when I was a kid of having comedy, having horror, having heart, and having all the different pieces in one movie and not just making it dramatic, not just making it scary or horror, having fun with it. So I think giving yourself a break from being scared, having tension, and having a laugh, I think is important to me. And that's what I like when I go into a movie. I like to walk out feeling a lot of different things. Um, and also, again, being a very visual person, I think having a focus on uh, the visuals, whether it's the costume, the character, a killer, something that's different and unique that could be memorable. I always, when I create a character, I always try to think to myself, would I want to cosplay this at a convention? Would I want to buy an action figure of this? If not, then I need to work on it some more. Would someone else want to cosplay it? You know, would it be a cool, recognizable thing that somebody would want to do and be inspired by themselves? And so I think having those kind of elements is what, in my mind, sets mine apart.
Great, thank you so much. Uh, you founded your own practical effects company, Real Fiction Studios FX, which suggests that practical effects are more than just another tool in your creative arsenal. Do you see them simply as a technical choice, or do they reflect a larger philosophy about filmmaking and storytelling?
I think it's a little bit of both. I fell in love with practical effects right away. And I think that goes back to Star Wars, seeing the masks and the costumes and all the practical elements they put in A New Hope. It was really fascinating to me that this kind of thing could be done.
Yeah.
And so I started making my own props and my own costumes right away as a kid using paper towel and toilet paper tubes and making little guns out of cardboard and that kind of thing. And it evolved into um, bigger, better props and effects. And eventually, I mean, that was kind of what inspired me to go into filmmaking in the beginning was that. So that's kind of my starting point, I guess. And it's led me to other amazing opportunities in the film world with acting or directing. And so I get to play in that whole big sandbox but I think it's definitely a choice. There's something grounded and real about it too. Like if you can touch it, you can hold it. And even getting a prop from a film after the film's over and holding that, there's a lot of collectors who, it means something in it. And holding something that the actors held on screen that you were able to watch or grow up with is just an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
And being able to interact with something while filming is it's just wonderful.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Uh, the disadvantages of working outside Hollywood are often discussed. What advantage has it given you creatively?
There's a lot of advantages. Several movies I've worked with, the actors we've used, who have worked in Hollywood for decades, they've come on and the smile on their face when we can do things that you normally can't do in Hollywood. There's choices we can make creatively. There's um, changing dialogue, in the moment. Sometimes, the actors are like, this is so freeing. It's like freedom to be able to
Yeah,
not have a producer stand over you and go, nope, the production company doesn't want to go that direction. Nope, you got to dial back the effects. Nope, you can't make this too gory or no, it, you can just do it. And, your own imagination and is your own limit. So there's a lot there where you have that certain freedom. Because to be fair, big studios in Hollywood, they want to make the best movie for the widest audience. And sometimes you have to take some things out that
yeah,
would make a niche audience more happy. And then you have to add some things in or storylines that will appeal to a younger audience. But when you're doing independent film outside of Hollywood, you can say, no, I know my audience. It's not huge, but this is what I like as that audience member. This is what I would want to see. I'm going to put that in. And it may not appeal to everyone. But at the same time, we have found that it's also opened the doors to other people who may not have otherwise had that door opened by a Hollywood film.
thank you. That's a great answer. Uh,
Hmm.
my next question is, how do you define success? When do you know a film has truly succeeded? Is it measured by box office numbers, audience reach, critical response, or something else entirely?
I think it's a little bit of everything. The I feel like The Death of Snow White was successful. It was something that was should have been impossible to make for the budget we had,
Yeah,
but we were able to complete it, and that's a success on its own. The premiere, the theater run it had, it was all very successful. People loved it. People went back to see it again. It's been selling well. We didn't have a big marketing team or a lot of money for marketing, so the word didn't get out. So we don't have the audience reach we would like. If there was one thing I would change was somehow getting it out in front of more people, making more people aware so they could see it. Because it's the audience reactions and feedback, like from people like you who saw it and were like, impressed
yes.
and had a good time with it. It's I think that has also made it successful is that we've been able to entertain people and tell a story successfully that may not have otherwise been told. And while it does have its, again, financial limitations and things that we would certainly put more time and effort into if we did have the funds and the money, it's um, it's still, I believe, successful.
Yeah, for me also it was very successful.
Oh, thank you.
As someone who has dedicated so much of your career to practical effects, what's your perspective on the rise of AI in filmmaking? Do you see it as just another tool, or do you think it could become a genuine threat to traditional crafts like practical effects?
Yeah, this is a very interesting one, and we're living right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Um, I see at some point it could be a tool that could be useful. Um, my preference would be to have practical effects and visual effects artists who use their training and their time to be able to create the digital effects, create the practical effects, and in places where it may not be possible to get the best result out of that combination, maybe just, put a little polish on a scene or put a little polish on something is it's like we've gone as far as we possibly can with the technology we have. This might polish it up a little bit. What I would not like is having it be typed out, give me a scene that has these people and that, and just play the scene out that way. That one I is not my favorite. So I'd rather have it just be something where it's the kind of the last resort. This is the polish on top of everything we've built and not a replacement. Because as an effects artist as well, we have talked to other production companies who are talking to us about, oh, can you do these kills and do these effects? And we're like, sure. And they say, give us a budget, tell us how much it's going to cost and give us a quote. And we're like, great, yeah, we'll get that to you. And they said, and if it's too much, we'll just use AI. And it's like, okay. So they're trying to price gouge us or, in a way that or lower our price for the thing or trying to get us to give them a low bid just to hang on to our job. And then we end up doing a lot of work for free or next to nothing so that we don't get replaced by AI. But ultimately, the audience is smart and the audience knows when AI is being used for the most part. And it does start to look like AI, and people are being taken out of the scene when they see that. And it's like, oh, you really want it to not look like anything was used, whether it's practical or digital or AI. So I think that there's going to be a wave of people using it because it opens the doors to a lot of filmmakers who don't have the funds to hire visual effects artists, the people who don't have money, because there's a lot of wonderful creative people who don't have the resources, they don't have the tools and the investors to make their vision. In those cases, I think it'll be used quite a bit. And then there's going to be a tipping point where people don't want to watch it because it doesn't feel authentic. And it'll kind of pull itself back. So, but yeah, outside of the environmental issues and the problems that AI causes, if we don't talk about that, which is its whole thing, just as far as creativity goes, I would prefer that it's used the least amount of possible and only where traditional styles can't complete the project.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great answer.
Thank
Uh,
you.
what's the most important lesson you learned throughout your career? If today's Jason Brooks could give one piece of advice to the Jason Brooks who was making his first film, what would it be?
That is a great question. That's the hardest question because I'm always learning. I'm still learning. Um, I'm learning important lessons all the time. I think if I was to go back, I would tell younger Jason to start earlier, believe in yourself sooner, and that you can do this. Growing up in a small town outside of Hollywood, everyone tells you, oh, it'd be great if you were in Hollywood, but you're not going to make money as a filmmaker. You're not going to become a filmmaker because you don't have Hollywood. You're not in that circle. So it's like, oh, that's a fun hobby. Go make your things on the side. But until the last, decade or two where digital media is blowing up and you have options, you have more options to be able to make a film that looks high quality. Um, I started getting more into it. So before that, I didn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a camera. So they were right at the time. But had I started sooner and gone to film school early and started pursuing that path, I think that would have set me up for today a lot more. I'd be more ahead of the game rather than starting later in my life. So that would be the thing is believe in yourself now, start now. Don't listen to others, in a negative way or anything like that. Just go for it and network. Always network.
Uh, While watching The Death of Snow White, I was occasionally reminded of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Not because the films are similar, but because of the way they embrace absurdity, tonal shifts, and a certain low budget charm rather than trying to hide it. How conscious were you of those camp and absurdist elements while making the film? Were they part of the vision from the beginning, or did they emerge naturally during production?
I was very much aware. We knew we were making a low budget film. We knew that We would not be able to compete with the digital imagery of companies like Disney who have billions of dollars to throw at something like this and make everything look perfect. We knew we'd have an imperfect world. So we thought, what would Snow White look like if it was more grounded in a reality, a more simple reality, and not this grand, massive scale castle with mass scale environments. So we knew going in we'd have to do some of that. I also knew I like some absurdity in films. Being over the top, that's kind of what makes film fun for me. So having kills that were over the top or having gore that might be a little bit over the top, having the mirror demons be these nude women, but black painted, you know, they're basically the queen's inner demons, her inner thoughts, speaking to her. Having it be Jacob and Wilhelm, who are just funny and a little silly and having some comic relief. Definitely knew going into it that there would be some absurdity. And it all was kind of played out in a way where you'd have Snow White and her friends. They had brighter colors. Everything was made on purpose with certain color schemes and everything. And they'd have some lightheartedness, and that world was a little brighter because it was for them. And the Queen, everything there was dark and gloomy and a little bit more monochromatic. And as the story went on and Snow White's world started falling apart and, merging in with the Queen, you saw those color tones kind of blending and you'd see the everything kind of shift. So it got a little darker. And as Snow White got, the castle, some things got a little brighter. It's just that all worked together. To kind of show that that's just like life. If you live a positive life and live in a happy world, things seem a little brighter, even when they're not. And if you live a dark life, your world's a little darker. So I kept a lot of the humor in that bright world on purpose, and the absurdity. And then when you get the dwarfs and you get the battle going, you bring some of that absurdity into that, even though it's a fight. So yeah, it was very much aware. And again, I just think that humor is fun in a movie, and a lot of people use humor as a defense mechanism, or when they're sad or scared, they use it in life, and so I think it's appropriate.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. Um, Fairy tales have survived for centuries because every generation found new ways to reinterpret them. Yet many modern adaptations seem more interested in recreating familiar images than offering a new perspective. What do you think makes a reinterpretation artistically worthwhile? As someone who took Snow White in a radically different direction, do you believe filmmakers have a responsibility to bring something new to stories that audience already know?
Yeah, I do think that filmmakers have a responsibility to bring something new to the stories that we already know, but I also think they have a responsibility to respect the original source material. And in making Snow White, again, it's a short story that's out there, so that won't make a full feature.
Yeah.
But what story can we tell? And so we thought about again the gaps, like what has not been told, what can we expand on, what would be interesting. And so it was important to us to keep the major beats of the story of that there is a Snow White, there's an evil queen, that the queen, wants Snow White's heart, that there's a kiss, the apple. We want to keep all those things because those are the things that stick with the the readers and the audience. That's what they want to see when they go see Snow White. There's certain expectations, like I want to see how this plays out when she eats the apple. I want to see how it plays out when the prince comes to kiss her. And if you can kind of take that, for like the kiss, for example, and give it more meaning in a different way, because the original story, it's a little silly. This old guy comes along and kisses this girl who's asleep without whatever, he just met. Um, what if we gave that more meaning? What if we gave a reason why that would work? Um, and then kind of go and do a little bit of backstory on the parents and everything. So I feel like we're rather than redefining what makes Snow White a successful short story, we decided to expand um, on elements that were not told yet and still stay true to the core beats of the original. And I that to me feels like we're respecting the original writers, the original story, and and paying homage to that while giving a little bit different direction and tone to the rest of it. Because it is a dark story. So that was another thing was you want to keep it dark. Fairy tales are often kind of scary and dark. So
Great. Thank you so much. That was a great answer.
thank you.
My last question is, recently, low-budget horror projects like Backrooms, Obsession, and Passenger have attracted a great deal of attention and found significant success. Though, to be fair, the Backrooms may not be entirely indie in the traditional sense, but you know what I mean. Uh,
Mhm.
as someone who has been working in the indie horror for many years, how do you view the rise of these kinds of films? Do you think they're changing the industry's perception of independent horror? And what does this new wave mean for filmmakers like yourself?
I think it's definitely changing some of the industry perception on independent horror and potentially independent film as a whole. There, there's always been independent film out there and independent filmmakers, but for a long time, independent film meant, oh, this is only $20 million. This is only $100 million, and now we're getting down to the $1 million or $750,000 or, 10 million. But that's still a lot of money. That is a lot of money to raise and a lot of money to gamble on a movie. But these big studios, they're gambling hundreds of millions of dollars on movies and losing a lot. And I think I noticed there's a lot of business-oriented people in the film industry, not on the creative side, and all they are looking at numbers. They're looking at SKUs and like this particular item does well right now. Oh, the audience is not there. Get rid of that stuff. Now do this. And they're not looking at the stories themselves. And they will, in production of movies, they'll try to keep it within a box that it feels safe. Because if you take too many risks, they're afraid of losing their audience and they don't want that. So it's like, oh, well, we know that superheroes work. We know that action scenes work. We know that big budget works. These visuals work. So, but people get tired of that and they want something different. And because you can only see that so many times, and then they'll abandon it and run to something else. Now it's vampires, now it's werewolves. And they just kind of go with that flow. So I think there's going to be a bit of that with indie horror film as well, where they're going to say, oh, indie horror film, let's go find influencers and have them make movies because that's what everyone wants to see. And then there's going to be a couple of duds that don't do well. Then they're going to move on again. What I'm hoping happens is that instead of spending 100 million on one movie, they can divide that into 10 or divide it into 100 and give indie filmmakers $1 million each and have 100 movies. I think you have a much better chance of success to have 100 movies that can potentially do well than one that may flop and lose everything. So I think there's some potential in some of the studios that might be a little smarter or adventurous or might want to experiment. Because I myself am on a project now that is a $10 million film that I'm going to direct. And we're working through some of the details of that. But I also told them, at the same time, while this film could be 10 million, we could make 10 films for 1 million or less, um, and so there's those options. And I'm wondering if seeing this success with Obsession and Backrooms will open those kind of doors where they might say, okay, well, maybe we will give some people a chance and we spend that but we'll also probably at the same time see some more of that studio interruption and studio um, direction where they're like, yeah, but you can't do what made your film successful. We want you to do our formula. So I think there's going to be some of that as well. But I'm hoping that there will be some more opportunities for these independent filmmakers. And I think that at the same time, we'll see the rise of new production companies, um, like um, th- uh, these guys who made these films. They may start making production companies and start funding their own films, that sort of thing, and not have to be tied down to a bigger studio. So if they can do that, they know what makes it successful. They know what they like. And I think we can see a new generation get some of the older business decision guys out who want to, hold back. So I think we're in a good time where there could be some good changes and great decisions made. We just have to make sure that some of those people make those decisions.
Thank you so much, Jason. Uh, and with that, we come to the end of my questions. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that it's been a good interview experience for you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great. The
Thank you
great
again for
questions.
thank you. Thank you again for taking time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. No, thank you for the time to write the questions, to watch the movie and to reach out and talk to me.